For 40 years, the FBI watched him. They listened to his phone calls, tracked his movements, and compiled a dossier of thousands of pages about his movements, words, and friendships. Frank Sinatra, the voice that made America swoon, the swagger that defined cool, was living under the most intense federal surveillance in Hollywood history. But what they discovered inside his legendary Palm Springs mansion would shake the very foundations of how we see Ol Blue Eyes forever. On August 13, 1943, a letter from San Jose arrived in Washington, penned by an anonymous citizen whose identity remains locked in government vaults to this day. The letter writer had heard something troubling over the radio, waved something in Frank Sinatra's voice that made them reach for their pen and warn the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Little did the world know, this single piece of correspondence would trigger one of the most extensive celebrity surveillance operations in American history. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, already paranoid about communist infiltration during World War II, suddenly had their sights set on the skinny kid from Hoboken, whose crooning was making Bobby Sutner's faint in theater aisles across the nation. The timing couldn't have been more explosive. Sinatra was at the height of his early fame, his voice floating from every radio in America, his image plastered on magazine covers from coast to coast. But behind the scenes, federal agents were already asking questions that would haunt the singer for decades. Was Frank Sinatra more than just an entertainer? Was he a threat to national security? The FBI wasn't investigating any such thing, but the tip ensured that it would. In February 1944, the FBI opened a limited inquiry that, actually, was far-reaching. What started as a simple background check would evolve into something far more sinister. Decades-long obsession that would see federal agents hiding in bushes outside Sinatra's homes, recording his private conversations, and building a case file that would eventually span more than 1,000 pages. The anonymous tipster could never have imagined that their moment of civic duty would unleash such a relentless pursuit. Frank Sinatra, the man who would become synonymous with American cool, was about to become America's most watched entertainer. In the shadow of World War II, Hollywood was a powder keg of political suspicion. Sinatra also appeared in FBI files, in connection with his contacts with racketeering investigation subjects and his early involvement with the Communist Party in Hollywood. Every benefit, concert, every political gathering, every signature on a petition was scrutinized under the FBI's magnifying glass. The Bureau's paranoia reached fever pitch when they began investigating Sinatra's connections to left-leaning causes. In their eyes, his support for civil rights, his friendships with suspected communist sympathizers, and his outspoken criticism of racial segregation painted a picture of a man who might be more dangerous than his smooth voice suggested. Federal agents pored over every benefit performance Sinatra gave for Jewish refugees, every anti-fascist rally he attended, every progressive cause he championed. They compiled lists of his associates, photographed him at political gatherings, and built a web of suspicion that stretched from the recording studios of New York to the sound stages of Hollywood. But the FBI's obsession went deeper than mere political surveillance. They were convinced that Sinatra's influence over American youth, those screaming teenagers who hung on his every note, could be weaponized for communist propaganda. The very passion that made him a star also made him, in their minds, a potential security threat. What the Bureau failed to understand was that Sinatra's politics weren't born from communist ideology, but from his own experiences with prejudice. In his innate sense of justice, the man who would later become known as the chairman of the board was simply ahead of his time, fighting for causes that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. As the 1950s dawned, a new chapter in the FBI's Sinatra file began to take shape, one that would prove far more explosive than their communist concerns. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tracked Sinatra for over 40 years, amassing a dossier of thousands of pages about his movements, words, and friendships. The FBI endlessly examined Frank Sinatra's connections to mob figures like Lucky Luciano and Sam Giancana. The transformation was as dramatic as any Hollywood script. The boyish crooner who had made teenagers swoon was evolving into something darker, more complex. His voice had grown richer, his persona more dangerous, and his associations more questionable. The FBI watched with growing alarm as Sinatra's name began appearing alongside some of the most notorious figures in organized crime. Lucky Luciano, the father of modern organized crime, had been deported to Italy, but maintained his influence through a network of loyal associates. When Sinatra traveled to Havana in 1947, ostensibly for a vacation, FBI agents documented every moment of his stay. What they discovered would fuel their suspicions for decades. Sinatra had carried a suitcase containing $2 million to the island, money that many believed was destined for Luciano's operations. The pattern continued with Sam Giancana, the Chicago outfit boss whose power stretched from the Midwest to Las Vegas. Federal surveillance teams photographed Sinatra entering and leaving Giancana's haunts. documented their phone conversations, and built a case file that painted a picture of a celebrity deeply embedded in the underworld. But perhaps most chilling of all was the FBI's growing realization that Sinatra wasn't just associating with mobsters, he might be working for them. The Bureau began to suspect that his performances in Las Vegas weren't just entertainment but cover for money laundering operations that funneled millions through the desert's glittering casinos. In the scorching desert of Palm Springs, Frank Sinatra built more than just a home. He created a fortress of privacy that would become the epicenter of FBI surveillance operations. The property, known as Twin Palms, wasn't just a retreat. It was a gathering place for Hollywood's elite, political power brokers, and, according to federal investigators, some of the most dangerous criminals in America. The sprawling compound, with its distinctive twin palm trees standing sentinel at the entrance, became a symbol of Sinatra's power and influence. Behind its walls, legendary parties unfolded under the desert stars, attended by everyone from Marilyn Monroe to John F. Kennedy. But the FBI saw something more sinister in these gathering secret meetings between organized crime figures and their celebrity frontman. The request to bug Sinatra's Palm Springs, Calif residence came in April 1963. LA requests authority to conduct a survey to determine feasibility of masseur in Sinatra's Palm Springs residence. An FBI document states, the Bureau's interest in the property had reached a critical point. They were no longer content to watch from a distance. They wanted to hear every word spoken within those walls. The technical challenges were immense. The property was isolated, surrounded by desert and guarded by Sinatra's security team. Any surveillance operation would require careful planning and execution. FBI technicians began studying the compound's layout, identifying potential entry points, and developing strategies to plant listening devices without detection. What made the Palm Springs house particularly intriguing to federal investigators was its role as a neutral meeting ground. Here, in the apparent safety of Sinatra's hospitality, figures from organized crime could mingle with legitimate businessmen, politicians, and entertainers. The FBI believed that crucial decisions about criminal enterprises were being made poolside, under the guise of casual conversation among friends. The year 1960 brought an unexpected twist to the FBI's Sinatra surveillance, one that would elevate their investigation from celebrity watching to national security concerns. Sinatra's high hopes was his campaign's theme song as John F. Kennedy launched his bid for the presidency. And suddenly, the crooner from Hoboken found himself with a direct line to the most powerful office in America. The relationship between Sinatra and Kennedy was electric from the start. JFK was young, charismatic, and represented a new generation of American leadership. Sinatra saw in him a kindred spirit, someone who understood the power of image and the importance of style. But the FBI saw something far more dangerous, a potential security breach at the highest levels of government. Federal agents documented every interaction between the two men with obsessive detail. They recorded phone conversations, photographed private meetings, and built a comprehensive file on what they saw as a compromising relationship. The Bureau's concerns weren't unfounded. Kennedy's personal life was as complicated as Sinatra's, and both men moved in circles that overlapped with organized crime. The situation reached a critical point when Kennedy was elected president. On July 13, 1960, the FBI produced a confidential report on Kennedy's background, relations with the FBI, and political views. The report painted a picture of a president-elect whose associations with Frank Sinatra could potentially compromise the integrity of his administration. But the FBI's worst fears seemed to be materializing when they learned of plans for Kennedy to stay at Sinatra's Palm Springs compound. The thought of the President of the United States sleeping under the same roof where alleged mob meetings took place sent shockwaves through the Bureau's hierarchy. This wasn't just about celebrity surveillance anymore. This was about national security. The decision to wiretap Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs home represented a watershed moment in FBI surveillance history. Never before had the Bureau committed such resources to monitoring a single entertainer, and never before had the stakes been so high. The operation that unfolded in the desert would reveal secrets that even the most seasoned federal investigators weren't prepared to hear. The technical complexity of bugging the Twin Palms estate was staggering. FBI technicians spent weeks studying the property's layout, identifying potential entry points, and developing a surveillance strategy that could capture conversations without detection. The compound's isolated location in the desert provided both challenges and opportunities. While it was difficult to approach undetected, it also meant that any audio surveillance would be free from the interference of urban noise. Working under cover of darkness, teams of FBI specialists infiltrated the property on multiple occasions throughout 1963 and beyond. They planted sophisticated listening devices in strategic locations: the living room where Sinatra entertained his guests, the dining room where business was often discussed over meals, and even the poolside area where the most sensitive conversations might take place. The intelligence gathered from these operations was explosive. Conversations between Sinatra and known organized crime figures were recorded in detail, revealing the depth of relationships that the FBI had only suspected. Phone calls discussing business ventures, entertainment bookings, and personal matters painted a picture of a man whose life was far more complicated than his public image suggested, but perhaps most shocking of all were the conversations that revealed Sinatra's awareness of the surveillance itself. The FBI's supposedly secret operation wasn't as covert as they believed. Sinatra and his associates had begun to suspect they were being watched and had developed their own counter-surveillance measures to protect their most sensitive discussions. The legendary Rat Pack, that iconic brotherhood of entertainers who defined cool for an entire generation, was more than just a social circle in the eyes of FBI investigators. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop weren't just Sinatra's drinking buddies. They were, according to federal surveillance, integral parts of a sophisticated network that blended entertainment with organized crime. FBI files from the 1960s reveal the Bureau's fascination with the group's activities in Las Vegas, where their performances at the Copa Room in the Sands Hotel and Casino served as cover for what agents believed were high-level criminal meetings. The very spontaneity that made their shows legendary, the inside jokes, the apparent improvisation, the sense of being part of something exclusive was interpreted by federal investigators as coded communication between criminal associates. Surveillance extended to each member of the group individually. Dean Martin's apparent, easygoing nature masked what the FBI suspected were deep connections to organized crime figures in Cleveland and Chicago. Sammy Davis Jr.'s conversion to Judaism and his interracial relationships were documented alongside reports of his alleged involvement in money laundering operations through Las Vegas casinos. Peter Lawford's marriage to Patricia Kennedy made him perhaps the most watched member of the group. As the president's brother-in-law, Lawford represented a direct connection between the entertainment world and the White House, a link that terrified FBI investigators who saw the potential for organized crime to influence the highest levels of government. The Bureau's surveillance revealed that the Rat Pack's legendary parties weren't just celebrations but carefully orchestrated events where criminal business was conducted under the guise of entertainment. Federal agents documented guest lists, recorded conversations, and built a comprehensive picture of what they believed was one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in American history. When Marilyn Monroe entered Frank Sinatra's orbit in the early 1960s, she brought with her a complexity that would add new dimensions to the FBI's surveillance operation. Monroe wasn't just another Hollywood starlet in Sinatra's circle. She was a woman whose connections to both the Kennedy brothers and organized crime figures made her one of the most watched individuals in America. FBI files reveal that agents were particularly interested in Monroe's relationship with Sinatra, which appeared to serve multiple purposes. On the surface, they were friends and occasional lovers, part of Hollywood's glittering social scene. But federal investigators suspected something deeper, that Monroe was serving as a conduit for information between Sinatra's criminal associates and her political connections. The surveillance of Monroe's visits to Sinatra's Palm Springs compound was intense and detailed. FBI agents documented her arrivals and departures, photographed her interactions with other guests, and attempted to record her conversations with both Sinatra and the various criminal figures who frequented the property. What emerged from this surveillance was a picture of Monroe as far more than the vulnerable blonde bombshell portrayed in the media. Federal agents began to suspect that she was actively involved in facilitating meetings between organized crime figures and political operatives, using her relationships with both the Kennedy brothers to provide intelligence that could be used for blackmail or influence. The tragic end of Monroe's life in August 1962 only deepened the FBI's suspicions about her role in what they saw as a vast criminal conspiracy. Agents investigating her death discovered evidence of phone calls to Sinatra in the hours before her suicide, conversations that were never fully explained and that added new layers of mystery to an already complex surveillance operation. He was the target of many extortion attempts that the FBI investigated. This single line from the Bureau's files hints at a darker reality of Sinatra's fame, one where his success made him a magnet for criminals seeking to exploit his celebrity for financial gain. The extortion attempts against Sinatra were sophisticated and varied, ranging from simple demands for money to complex schemes involving threats against his family and associates. FBI files document dozens of cases where federal agents worked to protect Sinatra from individuals who saw his wealth and fame as opportunities for easy profit. One of the most chilling cases involved threats against Sinatra's children in 1963. Just months after his son Frank Jr.'s kidnapping, federal agents uncovered a plot by organized crime figures to use the singer's family as leverage in business negotiations. The plan was elegantly simple: threaten those closest to Sinatra to ensure his cooperation in various criminal enterprises. But perhaps most disturbing were the extortion attempts that came from within Sinatra's own circle. FBI surveillance revealed that some of the singer's closest associates were feeding information to criminal organizations that could be used to blackmail him. The very people Sinatra trusted were documenting his activities, recording his conversations, and selling his secrets to the highest bidder. The Bureau's investigation of these extortion attempts provided them with unprecedented insight into Sinatra's private world. As they worked to protect him from criminal exploitation, federal agents gained access to his financial records, personal correspondence, and intimate details of his relationships, information that would prove invaluable in their broader investigation of his alleged criminal connections. December 8, 1963, a date that would forever change Frank Sinatra's relationship with the FBI. Still, the Bureau tracked the clues back to the house where Sinatra had been held in Canoga Park and gathered even more evidence there. The kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. wasn't just a personal tragedy for the family. It was a watershed moment that transformed the FBI's surveillance from suspicion to protection. The 19-year-old Sinatra Jr. was performing at Harrah's Club in Lake Tahoe when three men knocked on his dressing room door, claiming to be room service. What followed was a carefully orchestrated crime that would hold the nation's attention for days and provide the FBI with its most intensive look yet into the Sinatra family's private world. The kidnappers demanded $240,000 in ransom, a staggering sum that represented a fortune in 1963. But more than money, they wanted to demonstrate their power over one of America's most famous families. The psychological impact of the crime extended far beyond its immediate victims, sending a message to every celebrity in America that fame could not protect them from becoming targets. Frank Sinatra's response to his son's kidnapping revealed a side of him that FBI agents had never seen before. The man who had been portrayed in federal files as a sophisticated criminal associate was suddenly just a desperate father, willing to do anything to ensure his child's safety. Agents watched as Sinatra moved heaven and earth to raise the ransom money, calling in favors from both legitimate business associates and alleged criminal connections. The investigation that followed the successful rescue of Frank Jr. provided the FBI with a treasure trove of information about Sinatra's network of relationships. As agents traced the ransom money and investigated the crime, they gained unprecedented access to the singer's financial records, phone logs, and personal communications intelligence that would shape their surveillance operations for years to come. Las Vegas, in the 1960s, was more than just a city of gambling and entertainment. It was the unofficial capital of organized crime in America. And at the center of this glittering underworld sat Frank Sinatra, whose performances at the Sands Hotel and Casino provided cover for what FBI investigators believed were some of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in criminal history. The Bureau's surveillance of Sinatra's Las Vegas activities revealed a complex web of relationships between the entertainer, casino operators, and organized crime figures. Federal agents documented meetings in private dining rooms, recorded conversations in hotel suites, and tracked financial transactions that seemed to flow through the desert city's casinos with suspicious regularity. Sinatra's role as a draw for high-rolling gamblers made him invaluable to casino operators. But the FBI suspected his value extended far beyond his ability to fill showrooms. Agents believed he was actively involved in skimming operations, sophisticated schemes where casino profits were diverted before being reported to tax authorities, allowing organized crime figures to launder millions of dollars through legitimate gambling operations. The surveillance revealed that Sinatra's dressing room at the Sands wasn't just a place where he prepared for performances. It was a meeting place where criminal business was conducted under the guise of entertainment industry negotiations. FBI agents documented visits from known organized crime figures who had no apparent business in the entertainment world, but who regularly met with Sinatra during his Las Vegas engagements. Perhaps most alarming to federal investigators was evidence suggesting that Sinatra's influence extended to the hiring practices of major casinos. The FBI believed he was using his position to place criminal associates in key positions throughout Las Vegas, creating a network of influence that could be used to facilitate various illegal operations, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business. The Cal Neva Lodge, perched on the shores of Lake Tahoe, straddling the California-Nevada border, represented everything the FBI feared about Frank Sinatra's alleged criminal connections. When Sinatra became a part owner of the resort in 1960, federal agents saw not a legitimate business investment but the creation of a criminal headquarters. Disguised as a luxury retreat, the property's unique location made it perfect for activities that needed to escape the jurisdiction of either California or Nevada authorities. Guests could literally walk from one state to another within the confines of the resort, creating confusion for law enforcement and opportunities for those seeking to avoid legal scrutiny. FBI surveillance of the Calneva revealed a constant stream of organized crime figures who visited the property under the guise of enjoying its entertainment and gambling facilities. But federal agents believed the resort served a more sinister purpose as a meeting place where criminal organizations from across the country could conduct business away from the prying eyes of urban law enforcement. The situation reached a crisis point in 1963 when Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss who was supposed to be avoiding public appearances due to ongoing federal investigations, was spotted at the Calneva during one of Sinatra's performances. The incident wasn't just a violation of the conditions of Giancana's release, it was proof, in the FBI's view, that Sinatra was actively facilitating criminal activity at his properties. The scandal that followed would cost Sinatra his gaming license and force him to divest his interests in Nevada casinos. But more importantly for the FBI's investigation, it provided concrete evidence of the singer's willingness to risk his legitimate business interests to maintain his relationships with organized crime figures, evidence that would shape their surveillance operations for the remainder of the decade. By the mid-1960s, the FBI's surveillance of Frank Sinatra had evolved into one of the most technologically sophisticated operations in the Bureau's history. Gone were the simple days of following the singer and taking photographs. Federal agents were now employing cutting-edge electronic surveillance techniques to monitor his every move and conversation. The advancement in surveillance technology allowed the FBI to penetrate Sinatra's world in ways that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. Miniaturized recording devices could be hidden in rooms where Sinatra conducted business, while sophisticated telephone intercepts allowed agents to monitor his communications in real time. The Bureau's files reveal the extent of this technological surveillance: detailed transcripts of phone conversations, recordings of private meetings, and even audio surveillance of Sinatra's performances that were analyzed for coded messages to criminal associates in the audience. Federal agents had essentially turned every aspect of Sinatra's life into a potential source of intelligence about organized crime operations. Perhaps most invasively, the FBI began using what they called technical surveillance to monitor Sinatra's intimate relationships. Agents recorded conversations with girlfriends, family members, and close friends, searching for any information that might reveal the true nature of his alleged criminal connections. The psychological impact of this constant surveillance began to show in Sinatra's behavior. FBI agents noted increasing paranoia in his conversations, references to feeling watched, and changes in his communication patterns that suggested he was aware of the surveillance and was taking countermeasures to protect sensitive information. After decades of surveillance, thousands of hours of recorded conversations, and millions of dollars in investigation costs, what did the FBI actually discover about Frank Sinatra? The answer, revealed in the Bureau's secret 1,275-page dossier on the singer, was released in 1998 in response to Freedom of Information Act requests, would shock both supporters and critics of the legendary entertainer. The files revealed a man far more complex than either his public image or the FBI's suspicions had suggested. While federal agents had documented extensive contacts between Sinatra and organized crime figures, they had failed to uncover evidence of the singer's direct involvement in criminal activities. Instead, they found a celebrity who was often used by criminals seeking to enhance their own status and legitimacy. The surveillance had captured numerous conversations where Sinatra expressed frustration with his criminal associations, often complaining that he couldn't escape the shadow of organized crime that seemed to follow him wherever he went. In one particularly revealing recording, Sinatra lamented that his success had made him a target for every wannabe gangster seeking to claim a connection to him. But perhaps most surprising were the recordings that showed Sinatra actively trying to distance himself from criminal elements. Federal agents documented instances where the singer refused requests for favors from organized crime figures, declined invitations to events that might compromise him further, and even provided information to law enforcement when approached. Appropriately, the files also revealed the personal cost of the FBI's surveillance on Sinatra and his family. Recordings captured the singer's growing paranoia, his increasing isolation, and his struggle to maintain normal relationships while living under constant federal scrutiny. The man who had defined American cool for generations was revealed to be profoundly affected by the realization that his government considered him a potential enemy. The dates of these files fall between 1943 and 1985. 42 years of federal surveillance that spanned nearly Frank Sinatra's entire career. When the operation finally ended, it left behind more questions than answers, and a legacy that would reshape how we understand both celebrity, culture, and government overreach in America. The FBI's investigation of Sinatra had consumed enormous resources and revealed troubling truths about the extent to which federal agencies were willing to go to monitor American citizens. The surveillance had employed hundreds of agents, cost millions of dollars, and violated numerous constitutional principles in pursuit of evidence that ultimately never materialized. But the impact extended far beyond Sinatra himself. The investigation had captured conversations and activities of countless other individuals who had the misfortune of associating with the singer. Politicians, entertainers, business leaders, and ordinary citizens found themselves subjects of federal surveillance, simply because they moved in Sinatra's orbit. The psychological damage to Sinatra was profound and lasting. Friends and associates noted dramatic changes in his behavior during the years of most intense surveillance, increasing paranoia, difficulty trusting new people, and a tendency toward isolation that was completely at odds with his naturally gregarious personality. When the files were finally released in 1998, following Sinatra's death, they revealed a surveillance operation that had lost sight of its original purpose and had become an end in itself. The FBI had become so invested in watching Sinatra that they continued the investigation long after any legitimate law enforcement purpose had been served. The FBI files on Frank Sinatra tell a story that transcends the life of one entertainer, reveal the dark side of American power and the price of fame in a surveillance state. For 4 decades, federal agents watched, listened, and documented every aspect of Sinatra's life, convinced they were tracking a dangerous criminal when they were actually observing one of America's greatest artists, struggling to maintain his humanity under impossible circumstances. The ultimate irony of the FBI's investigation is that their surveillance revealed Frank Sinatra to be exactly what he appeared to be: a talented, complicated, sometimes difficult man whose only real crime was being too successful for his own good. The criminal mastermind they sought never existed except in their own imaginations, fed by decades of speculation, innuendo, and the peculiar paranoia of the Cold War era. Today, as we grapple with questions about government surveillance, privacy rights, and the power of federal agencies, the Sinatra files serve as a chilling reminder of how easily law enforcement can lose sight of its purpose and become the very threat it was created to defend against. The man who sang, "I did it my way," ultimately paid a terrible price for doing exactly that, living life on his own terms in a country that had decided his independence made him dangerous. The FBI found nothing in Frank Sinatra's house that would leave us speechless except the echo of a voice that refused to be silenced, even under the weight of a surveillance state that never truly understood what it was watching. What secrets do you think the FBI files on other celebrities might contain? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden stories from Hollywood's golden age. The truth, as always, is stranger than fiction.